Welcome to Trust Talks, the inaugural InsurTech Insights podcast, hosted by ClearSpeed. I'm Danny Inziquan. In the Trust Talks podcast, we're asking senior insurance leaders for their perspectives on trust in the context of the industry. Why is trust critical? Joining us now is Dave Rengachary, Senior Vice President, Head of Underwriting for U.S. Individual Life at RGA Reinsurance Company. Dave, thanks for being here.
Yeah, for having me.
So let's talk about life for a moment, and not philosophically, and more the underwriting perspective. So, and why trust is critical to the process.
No, and I'm totally curious, and I'm biased, of course, but I think that's a great place to begin. Reflecting on that question of just doubling down on that being really the cornerstone of our business model. And I'm curious, as we kind of compare it to other industries, whether they would say the same thing or otherwise, I don't think the case for it at the end of the day. At the end of the day, we trust in the consumer to bring us accurate information. Yes, we've got ways of verifying it, but none of them really sort of remove that foundational element of trust. But really, conversely, maybe even more importantly, the consumer is trusting us to be good financial stewards of the underwriting dollar, such that we're in a position to keep that promise not 5, 10 years, but easily 20, 30, 70 years from now. That's an incredible amount of trust that the consumer is placing in the process. And on the face of it, nothing about this business model should work. And yet, it has persisted largely unperturbed for 150 years. So 100% I can put forward that trust is the cornerstone of our business model.
In that vein, I mean, in building the trust, we chatted a little bit earlier about, questions that you might get in this regard and around trust and, data sources that are being used and, using the most sensitive information possible. So that too, it kind of adds to the complexity, but also the criticality of that trust in that situation. Where do you see money being left on the table? And is there a consumer trust factor that needs to be better addressed?
So, I know it's a 15-minute podcast, but I just have to take a little bit step back to answer that question, because it is a bit of a story, right? And again, apologies, well familiar with that story, but at the end of the day, we realized several years ago that in comparison to adjacent industries, we really have a consumer journey problem at the end of the day. There just isn't a comparable process, if you will, to another product where it takes weeks and weeks and weeks. It takes physical examination. We may draw your blood. I mean, just what other product is there like that? As we're competing for the consumer wallet, we realize that that's just going to be a barrier going forward. And so to solve that problem, and here's the critical, the critical bottleneck, is those exams, those labs, they are highly predictive, right? And so to solve that problem, we needed to bring on other data sources. And we did in abundance. With exuberance, we brought on these other data sources. But then we look around there, and our underwriters back home will say, yeah, Dave, thanks for nothing. But at the end of the day, we literally have doubled the file sizes that our underwriters need to navigate through in the short period of time. And what we are hearing echoed across the carrier landscape is, yes, we love data source A, we love data source B, we love data source B. We can't have them all at the end of the day. So where money is being left on the table is efficiency. And I absolutely believe the keenest area of underwriting competition on the go forward is not anymore the competitiveness of the offer. Of course, that's critically important, but really the keenest is the efficiency, the ability to sit through this information in a cost-effective and a timely manner.
Yes. And so, what can we do about it? Because like you said, that's also putting additional, say, stress on the customer. If there's all these data sources that have to be sorted through, you have to do follow-ups, customers waiting longer to get some kind of resolution. And then in the meantime, there's a lot of pressure on your resources internally as well. So what can we do?
But at the end of the day, it does involve taking a bit of a step back. And what I mean by that is the key problem in our industry about these data sources. On the surface, they look relatively simple, right? So these are things like your clinical lab history, your medical claims billing data, and electronic health records. They'll give us various pieces of medical information. But I think what we probably underestimated is the difficulty in comparing the protective value across those data sources. And because it's a real moving target to begin with. Just as an example, if I go out and order an electronic health record, what are my chances of finding an actual piece of information? That the answer to that question, the good news is it's improving on a daily basis. The bad news is it's changing on a daily basis. So as we're doing our cost benefits analysis, it's a moving target. So what we're doing here at RGA is we're spending a lot of time on that foundational piece of comparing the protective value across digital data sources. And we're calling that a digital underwriting evidence playbook at the end of the day. But that's our key initiative going forward, to be much more surgical and personalized in the underwriting requirements.
Yes, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. And we've been hearing today in a lot of the conversations just around how you can better personalize the experience for consumers, meeting them where they are as well, making it easier for them to access what they need, and all of that, kind of consumerizing the journey. When we talked earlier too, you had a bit of a hot take on the state of innovation in underwriting, and maybe that there's actually an opportunity to do more than maybe the industry is currently doing. Can we talk a bit more about that?
Always fascinating to hear others' opinions on it, but it feels as though we're at a philosophical kind of reaching point in underwriting innovation, right? Because there's just absolutely no doubt about it, and I won't sugarcoat it, that every underwriting shop is under tremendous expense pressures. And whenever that happens, of course, the dollar goes toward those things that have the most concrete and immediate return on the investment. And so I think that then becomes the real sort of philosophical question to carriers and reinsurers alike is, yes, of course, that's gonna help out with problem B and C, towards the end of the year. But to truly gain competitive dominance, we all realize that we have to be looking around the market. And in this expense pressure environment, the question that becomes is, what's the right amount on a really practical basis? What's the right amount that we should be budgeting towards innovation when we don't know all that what that ROI is going to be? And we do know that it's going to be less than some of the things that are on the plate today. None.
There does seem to be sometimes a bit of an analysis paralysis. You think innovation, you think, oh, big, oh, spending, like this huge thing, rip out all the systems we have. But, from your perspective, does it have to be that way?
Okay, so you just hit on like the other philosophical debate, right? And that is that debate between, do I go for, sorry for the sports analogy, but do we go for the singles there? That certainly improves the likelihood of that ROI and there. But at the end of the day, everybody should. And this is what I end up believing. At the end of the day, when you take a look at the strategy document and pillars that you created, you just have to look at that and say, is the home run somewhere on this page? And that's what we do, just on one yearly frequent basis.
I think that's a great way to put it. And, I had another conversation with somebody else who said something similar, where it's, instead of, sitting there and trying to stack everything and figure this is, just look for the outcome. Is it there? Is that and then figure out how to get there, and then just throw out some of the barriers to change in that regard. If I can ask you, if there's something you would say to leaders listening, whether about taking action or something you think that folks should be thinking more about, what would that be?
So I will take credit for going an entire 10 minutes without mentioning artificial intelligence.
It's time.
But now I'll give that up. But I actually think it ties in really well with these conversations around trust. And I think the challenge that I would look forward to insurance leaders is that when you think of that intersection between artificial intelligence, underwriting, and trust, I think the natural inclination is to immediately revert to the defensive, right? At the end of the day, the mental shortcut is to a robotic decision delivered in a black box fashion. What I would challenge industry leaders is that, what if you took that defensive mindset and literally just flipped it on its head. It took those and said, can we make those selling points, if you will, of the AI initiatives? And what I mean by that is I think there's tremendous opportunity to actually better explain the decision logic in our underwriting decisions through the use of artificial intelligence here. And the reason is it's actually a really manually intensive process to document for underwriters why they came to the decision that they came to. And we're seeing great immediate strides with artificial intelligence to provide efficiencies in just that. And what we're doing right now, it is far beyond already today what underwriters are capable from a time and efficiency standpoint of documenting. And we can now bring these breadcrumbs, if you will, to our decision logic, present them to both, carriers, distributors, consumers, most importantly, and really actually improve the transparency of our decision-making process. And again, flip that question on here. And then there's the question of the robotic piece. And here I may be taking a bit of a flyer, but I gotta say, and I'm sure you're the same, that when I am interacting with these large language models, of course I'm impressed by the knowledge base that it's getting together. I'm impressed, and I'm, partially afraid of also the human nature that these are taking on, like in the thought process and the emotion. Like I, created just this little silly essay, and I just said, just make it 10% cheekier, and it delivered. You know what I mean? So the point of all of that is we think of then any output of the artificial intelligence as it relates to underwriting and just purely robotic. But I think there's the potential of an opportunity there. And whether it's fully human, I don't know, but it's certainly better than I think our perception in terms of what, the type of empathy that we can bring to the process as well.
I think that's an interesting perspective because partly the human technology interaction does bring in, I think, some of the empathy to that output. If you think about it, you have to know about prompts, prompt engineering. You have to have a human expert to understand what the outcome is that you want from the input. And then, another question would be, what does that say for our underwriters of the future in terms of their skill sets, or what could things look like for them going forward?
So at the end of the day, you think about sort of what this would hopefully be taking off of the table. And, I think the common mantra is not only for underwriters, but just for every job USA is is that this would allow then underwriters to operate at the top of their skill set. So I think the question then becomes is what is that top of the skill set for underwriters, right? And I think part of that is going to be critically thinking and probably bringing in now the combination of outputs from models with other elements that are not included in the model. So just on a really practical level, that then will become, for an underwriter, you have the medical piece and the financial piece. And for a variety of reasons, we're really focusing on the medical piece in terms of where we're bringing our AI efficiency. And so combining it then is actually really where the underwriter plays a critical role in sharpening the pencil and making the offer actually more competitive than it would have been through algorithm alone. The second piece is just what you mentioned. I think there's going to be a need for the ability, like ultimately distributors care when there's that need for interaction. They don't want it to be with the robot. So the communication skills, I think, are going to be, just really critical. And then I would default to the obvious, right? Our underwriters, and myself included, just on a constant daily basis, are striving to improve our data, our AI fluency.
Yes, I love that. We have gone through our questions, so we can wrap, but I did want to ask you, Dave, if there's anything else you wanted to share perspective-wise or anything else that came to mind while we were talking.
I think it maybe gets to one of the questions actually that we were talking about in prep, and that was just around other ways, or what would that look like, if you will, if we were able to improve consumer trust, and in particular, improve it earlier on in the process. Because one of the trends that we are most definitely seeing with all of these data sources, we're taking the advantage now, finally, of the fact that they are instantly available. And so, almost by definition, these data sources are being used earlier on in the process. And in particular, being used to compare with the information that we receive from disclosure.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, there's no magic about what the implications of that are, and they are both positive. I think they will ultimately allow us to use less data in the subsequent, parts of that process.
Yeah.
And they will ultimately be able to improve the customer journey further by being able to reduce the need to offer less questions in that process to begin with.
Yeah.
Application disclosure matches with the data. No need to dig in.
Exactly. Yes. And again, going back to the previous conversation I was having here, the folks were saying, it's time for insurers to build for customers versus building for insurers who need to get a job done. And I think that's a great example of that. So think about the systems that are in place and think about it from the customer perspective. So I love that. Let's leave it there, Dave. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.